Not a lot of movies about superheroes are super successful. Marvel came along later with the Iron Man in 2008, but this was at a time where like superhero movies weren't necessarily a prominent thing. It was kind of more in the TV world anyway. I know they had The Amazing Spider-Man, Batman the Animated Series. For some reason, superhero stories were only working in the TV format, and this is no exception. Powerpuff Girls Movie is essentially the beginning of the entire series, so I consider it the pilot. It's the 70-minute film, feels like it should be in theaters, but for some reason, oh, no, it was. But the opening shots are actually really pretty. They're just like background art, but they look so vibrant and well drawn, especially for 2025. You could tell this was an early success for Cartoon Network because a lot of the aesthetics and artistic choices are falling in line with how Cartoon Network would inevitably be. For example, like you see a lot of those promos of like the characters in the streets, Billy and Mandy or Courage the Cowardly Dog, and they're all like walking through real world like scenarios. But it looks like a lot of the art from those promos are used in here. So it seems like the Powerpuff Girls movie did play a big part in establishing the identity of Cartoon Network and like what its brand would be. It definitely gives me vibes of like Dexter's Laboratory too. Like it looks a lot like that. So we're thrown into the world of Townsville, and everything is not really in a good spot. The professor is already scared to go to and from the grocery store in his own town, which is kind of a red flag. I don't know, Cartoon Network was really good at creating like a visual language that showed, hey, this is one of the cartoon TV shows. Even though this was essentially a film, the narrator's opening monologue is actually pretty poetic. It's like everything needs a little bit of spice and sugar, and it's talking about like the professor's life, and it's cool because it's like cartoons don't usually have time to do that. In short form TV, it's usually just plot, but it seems like they're really good at texturizing all this dialogue so far in this movie. Then we cut to the abrupt opening of the whole thing, and it's like this stressful moment where a monkey is breaking everything in Professor Utonium's lab. The guy who created Samurai Jack also did the same art for this show, and it's very clear. Kind of similar to how Danny Phantom and Fairly Odd Parents have a really similar art style despite being very different shows. I mean, this show was a little bit of Samurai Jack, but you also can see the influences of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. Craig McCracken. It was somehow like the perfect combination of the two guys' styles. The title sequence is short and prominent. It's just like literally the logo flying into a black void, which is, it's cute because we hear the girls laughing and giggling, so we already kind of know what's about to happen. After the girls are created, we get to see them in like everyday life, and I love that we actually have the time to do small things like this, like seeing the girls get adjusted to Townsville and their first uses of their powers. They even cut 3 holes into the house to establish that it's going to be their forever home. And it's funny because looking back, it seems like every origin in this show had an explanation to it. You know, like the way the house is set up, the way the town is established. It's very clear it started right here. We get that with a lot of pilots, but it's definitely not a thing for a lot of movies. I know something similar is like the Jimmy Neutron did a pilot type movie where it was the first thing we saw of the characters, and it was a feature length film as opposed to like an episodic plot line. So we didn't necessarily get the full feel of what the series would be, but we're definitely off to a good start. Their powers are like wondrous, and even when they go to preschool for the first time, the kids are excited to meet them. It's a very positive, you know, act 1 to act 2 transition as we start to get to know these girls. The guy Gennady Tarofsky, he's so good at adding silence into cartoons specifically. You know, we're used to a lot of fast-paced comedy dialogue, like there's never a piece of silence, but this guy, literally Samurai Jack, barely had any dialogue, and there's not music, there's sometimes subtle texture noise, like the girls floating. There's just a lot of silence. Silence is used very creatively in this show.
Now, let's begin. Hello, Professor, right on time.
I feel like Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends started out doing it this well, and then they eventually got a little bit more quicker with it. As shows became a lot more produced, pilots became a lot more strict, and things just got a little bit rule-based. You could tell the fun and carefreeness is in this film because they're essentially doing things that we now would consider unnecessary, like small moments like that. I never noticed that we actually visually like identify with the professor. I'm not saying like we automatically identify as him, but I feel like the perspective of the movie is told from the professor's perspective because we care about the girls and their safety, which is like kind of the primary concern. We only really feel that they're already established that the Townsville is not a safe place. So seeing them like ease into this is really cute. Professor Utonium comes to pick up the girls and sees that the classroom is like super messy, and he's immediately convinced that it was the girls somehow, and he's like, oh my god, I'm so sorry for them, I didn't think this would happen. And the teacher says like, oh, this is just normal with preschoolers, which remind us that like the girls are actually, you know, just as real as like somebody you would find in real life. They're not different at all, and it's good at establishing that, especially for this next part. Get to see the girls interacting with the other guys and girls their age, and they all initiate in this game of tag. So basically they're taught what tag is, and it's kind of like a disease. And we see the girls get really competitive and actually start to see their like individual quirks come out. As before this, they've been kind of traveling as a unit as these super powered innocent girls. But now we see that there's Blossom, Buttercup, and Bubbles, who all have their distinct personality. Like Bubbles is the cutesy, crybaby one, Blossom is the natural leader, the morality compass, and then Buttercup, which is like the hot-headed, like can't control her temper type. And we see that they're competitive with each other and that they love to play games, and there's like a playfulness with this first experience of tag. It's so nostalgic to think of the first time you've ever played a game and how innocently they approach something like this. This is like one of their first social experiences. Like we're seeing the girls actually figure out who they are through a competitiveness of like a fun little game. So the plot kind of kicks in a little bit here when the girls accidentally take this game of tag to the extreme, using all their superpowers to their advantage. And poor Townsville, like, things are getting even worse for it. I feel bad for the Townsville as a character. It feels like they're getting abused. But yeah, we basically get to see what it's like when you're a kid and you get to go out into the real world, but, you know, you're not super socially cognizant of your surroundings, so you just act out. And it seems like the girls are just innocently having a good time here. And we get introduced to the mayor, who seems like he is staring out the window at the city getting destroyed and, like, kind of upset about it, but we learn that he's actually upset about a pickle and not necessarily Townsville. But luckily he has his secretary and the entire government to do the real work that he was gonna do. I think that led to that trope where it's like you see like a man in high of power in government and they are focused on clearly only themselves. It's like a funny trope that I think started coming back a lot more since then. We don't see this a lot in like Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network. These girls are struggling with a lot earlier identity issues. Like there's just a different growing pain you have to deal with from the Powerpuff Girls position versus like Timmy Turner as a 5th grader. You know, like I kind of feel bad for the professor a little bit more at this point because he's like definitely very apologetic. Like he sits and he talks to them about using his powers. Like they just destroyed the world and he doesn't seem like an inch mad at them, which is cool. This is like the perfect father figure. I like how Professor Utonium kind of takes accountability. Like he's very much aware that they're girls, they're just growing, like everything they're doing is normal, and he is so reliable. He's like a good parental figure. The professor is calm, collected, and he's just a good father. And you feel a lot more empathetic toward him because it's like the girls are created, you know, they're like an experiment, and to see him take such a mentoring role for things that don't necessarily exist, like the Powerpuff Girls, I mean, I guess they do exist, but you know what I mean. It just shows a lot of care in a person to take this kind of approach. He says people get scared when they see something unique, and that is 100% the big dramatic question of this entire movie. This is going to be the exact theme that causes all the concurrent events to transpire. So put on your seatbelts. We're gonna keep going. When the girls go back to class, of course, the entire class is so upset with them. Even the teacher is like basically saying how they have to go to school with no recess and this broken down place as we look at the girls, and there's this really sad spotlight on them from a hole in the roof, and it's cinematic, it's beautiful, and we feel horrible for the girls. The time that they're taking to like really make us feel for the characters is really fun. Things take a turn for the worse as the mayor actually arrests the professor who just wants to pick up the girls from school. It's really funny because it's like, that's his only goal. He's just like, I gotta pick up the girls from school, and they're basically like, yep, come with us, you're in trouble. It makes me feel really bad for the professor because it's like he's just trying to do a good thing, but like, you kind of get it. Like, the Powerpuff Girls are kind of a threat to everyone. But you feel for the professor, like you're on his side, so it does feel like a higher weight is given to the girls, and like, we're more worried about him. The girls are waiting at school for the professor to pick him up, and he doesn't come, so the girls are really devastated. We get to see them in their second fight, and it's always funny to watch them fight because you can really tell the differences between them. Like, they're so distinct in their own ways.
Come on, girls.
And they have this new goal of like, okay, we're just gonna walk home, which is something that the professor really didn't want to happen, and we feel like the danger of that because they're like, oh my god, these girls are just clearly not going to use their powers. They're not going to fly home. They just were told not to use their powers, so now they're walking home in this dangerous city as like pre-K students. There's another really funny sequence where we get to see the news and see how much everybody really hates the Powerpuff Girls, like what's going on with the professor, and it's intertwined with the mayor basically calling out everybody to worry about pickles more than this situation at hand.
Pickle caught killing! Freaks. Back to you, Linda.
The whole idea of like the main characters being left behind in like a really young and innocent way is something that Craig McCracken definitely did in the pilot for Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, which is also a really good pilot. I feel like it's just as good as this one. But like, it's funny that we are starting to see his identity. Like, I wonder what he was like growing up. Like, was that really something that was a big deal, as being left behind? Because that is, I mean, he beautifully weaves it into his storytelling. I'm not complaining. And the music is like it's just clear this is like his show. Like, I see the whimsical music, the witty dialogue, and the heart. It's so grounded in heart, and it's definitely somebody who made both Foster's Home and this show. Like, I'm starting to see it a lot easier. I like that friendship is usually the themes, like being unique seems to be consistent in both of his shows. And poor girls are really upset because they see what it's like when everybody hates them. Something that no girl in pre-K should experience. But I guess we're living in the TikTok age, so who knows? The plot seems to follow their walk home here further. And it's really cool because that reminds me of like a road trip movie. Like you have one destination and the girls are just get their way home. Then they see Mojo Jojo for the first time, and he's just like a shadow. Like these two eyes that peek out of the darkness. And that's a really cool first shot already. I mean, we saw him for a moment before, but this is like really his introduction. He like talks to the girls about what it's like to be a failure or to have uniqueness, not necessarily be a good thing, and really bite you in the butt. Of course, the girls really empathize with that. They're like, yeah, we know. Like, we were told that people find uniqueness scary. And this Jojo, the monkey, is taking essentially on the mentor role because now they don't really trust the professor as much as they did before they knew that he wasn't picking them up. From their perspective, the professor pretty much rejected them. They're convinced that the professor hates them. And that's the saddest part, I feel like. And I like how like the girls insist that this guy's good. Like, they actually give Mojo a pep talk and are like, you know, you're definitely a good person. Even though he's blatantly telling them like, nope, I'm evil. I'm actually gonna destroy the world. They just seem to be like, no, you're not. I'm dwelling it down to sound like less intimate of a thing, but it's actually a really cute scene. We definitely can tell that he is kind of manipulating the girls. If you guys want to see more about manipulation in 2D cartoons, I've recently made a video talking about my favorite arc in the old Kids WB Cartoon Network show Shaolin Showdown, and it's definitely worth watching, so please go check it out. And I love that the interaction with Mojo Jojo gives the girls the confidence to use their powers again. Like, you see them fly up into the air and Mojo is so impressed, and they suddenly have like this new relationship that the girls had never had before. It's their first experience with judgment, you know, like they meet somebody and they're like, okay, this is my judgment of this person based on what they know, and they don't know that much. They're like little girls. Like, of course they're gonna have, you know, like their first impression of somebody before they know who to trust. Like, you have to go wrong before you go right. Oh, and then I noticed this definitely, that this is Craig McCracken's work when they're at the top of the volcano and the conversation is just going back and forth super quickly.
To harness the energy of the Earth's core for power.
What are you talking about?
The plan.
What plan?
Our plan.
To do what?
To make the town better, of course.
What?
Like, they say a lot shorter phrases and they go through the characters quicker. It's a lot more natural of dialogue than any kid show I've really seen. And the girls actually help Mojo Jojo rebuild his tower, thinking that they're doing a nice thing with somebody who actually appreciates them. And so they really care about trying to make this guy happy because he's giving them positive reinforcement and they feel loved. I wish they made simple movies. The movie plots become more complex. It forces the characters to have to be simpler, and then the feelings like have to be even minuscule to none. Like there's not enough room for everything in there. So it feels like the more plots get complicated, the less characters have room to grow and the less feelings we could feel altogether. But if we pull back on our plot, like the Powerpuff Girls did, keep it super simple, we have room for more complex characters and even longer moments for small nuances like feelings.
He's not coming. He hates us. He totally hates us.
Writing feelings into a script is hard, especially when you're making complex plots all the time. And when you don't have those moments, the plots feel too fast. And film and TV just feels so fast nowadays. Like, of course there's not enough room to feel. What this does right is make the plot as simple as humanly possible. One thing leads to another based on the theme going on, which is uniqueness can make people scared. The best shows of kids content are good at making it breathe, having room for less complex characters and even simpler plots so that way everything is digestible. The professor comes home and suffers pretty much because he was just beaten up in jail, I guess. This poor professor is like taking all the blame for all these girls' responsibilities, and he still has not gotten a chance to explain himself to them. And it's so sad because of course we know that they care about each other, they're just trying to get to each other, but there's so much in the way and it's so much external issues like that it's almost toxic to their family and something they've built out of love so far in this movie. Then the girls think that they're actually successful, that their powers are going to be worth something, and maybe the professor will finally love them if they use their powers for good. The girls pick up Professor Utonium to show them what their powers did, how they helped Mojo Jojo, and meanwhile Mojo Jojo was actually taking over the entire city of Townsville, like with all of his monkey friends. There's like a dialogue that's coincided with both, where it's like the girls are talking about how excited this new world is gonna be. Mojo Jojo is talking about how he pretty much owns this new world thanks to the help of the Powerpuff Girls, and they both basically hit each other at the same time. Powerpuff Girls are at the center of all of it. They've appointed Mojo Jojo.
Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup. I couldn't have done it without ya.
The world is worse than it's ever been, and it's because of these girls using their powers. Like, there's nothing worse. To top off the darkest of the dark moment, Professor Utonium finally gives up on them, and it is, oh gosh, it's so heartbreaking.
Please believe us.
I don't know who to believe.
The girls don't even deal with it. They're just like, okay, we're out of here. They run away crying, and this is like one of the times where it's like very clear when there's like an act break, like this is the worst of the worst, and they actually are doing a good job cinematically telling us that this is like the beginning of the end, where they're looking through space and we see the asteroids, and we go to the girls, the Powerpuff Girls on the moon. They're like depressed and sad, sitting on the craters of the moon. Oh, I feel bad for them. Of course, they argue, and especially Blossom and Buttercup get into a really big argument, which kind of reminds me of Goku and Vegeta from Dragon Ball Z. Like, I mean, look at how similar these conversations feel. Okay, if you don't agree with me, whatever, comment below. They sit depressed until they hear the professor screaming from across the galaxy. What? They quickly jump off the moon and run all the way back to Earth. They're looking for the professor, trying to help him specifically, when they see so many worse things going on, and then they start to help other people, like save this kid's dog, save the baby. They start to inadvertently use their powers for something that a responsible person would use them for. And poor them, like they've never understood what is and isn't appropriate to use their powers for. Townsville doesn't know, and nobody's cutting them slack about it. The girls essentially have to take accountability for everybody else's issues. But it's really cool how like it just comes so naturally to them to do the right thing by helping all these people. And in a climactic moment, Mojo Jojo takes Chemical X, grabs the girls, and heads to the top of the mayor's building. In the end, like, the mayor congratulates them, the professor's proud of them, and everything seems to work out perfectly. And we get the narrator back. We get the first couple locations that we started out with in the movie, and it's a really sweet, conclusive ending as we start As we start to transition with where Tom Kenny is basically the girl's narrator, and they come on in, and he talks as they just stand there in front of this beautiful heart-shaped background. And suddenly the show is officially established. This is the pilot episode of the Powerpuff Girls, essentially. Everything that happens in the regular show is after this, therefore this is the pilot episode. I know it's a movie, it was released theatrically, didn't do so well, but overall, like, this is such a beautiful film and a great start to a television show. I wish this almost was like integrated within the series, like it feels like one of those shows that just get thrown into the plot, but if you see the movie, you know that everything has a purpose, that everything is a little bit deeper than it was set out to be. And overall, it's just so good. I highly recommend watching this. If you ever had to watch the beginning to a show like Jimmy Neutron, there's just so many good 2000s cartoons to look at. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm Johnny2000, and this is my channel. Don't forget to subscribe, like, I don't know, whatever you guys do on your free time. Do it to my channel.